Manchester, Manchester City, and Metropolitan Borough in the Metropolitan County of Greater Manchester Urban County, northwestern England. Most of the city, including the historic core, is in the historic county of Lancashire, but it includes an area south of the River Mersey in the historic county of Cheshire. Manchester is the nucleus of the largest metropolitan area in the north of England, and it remains an important regional city, but it has lost the extraordinary vitality and unique influence that put it at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution. Manchester was an urban prototype. In many respects, it could claim to be the first of the new generation of huge industrial cities created in the Western world during the past 250 years. In 1717, it was merely a market town of 10,000 people, but by 1851, its textile, chiefly cotton industries, had so prospered that it had become a manufacturing and commercial city of more than 300,000 inhabitants, already spilling out its suburbs and absorbing its industrial satellites. By the beginning of the 20th century, salients of urban growth linked Manchester to the ring of cotton manufacturing towns Bolton, Rochdale, and Oldham, for example, that almost surround the city, and a new form of urban development, a conurbation or metropolitan area, was evolving. By 1911, it had a population of 2,350,000. In the following years, however, the pace of growth slowed dramatically. If the 19th century was Manchester's golden age, when it was indisputably Britain's second city, the 20th century was marked by increasing industrial problems associated with the decline of the textile trades. The people. Greater Manchester is one of the world's most compact and crowded metropolitan areas. The overcrowded conditions explain the chief demographic trend of recent years, that of population loss by outmigration. Manchester City itself lost almost one-third of its population to migration between 1961 and 1981, one of the highest rates of migrational loss among all British cities. Natural increase is below the national average, for the migration is chiefly of young families of childbearing age, leaving an older population in the core cities. Much of this migration is to suburban areas, though there is also an interregional loss of population to more prosperous areas of Britain, and the dormitory districts of the fringes are growing strongly. Thus, the metropolitan area is decentralizing quickly, and its overall population trend is more favorable than those of its major constituent cities. Total metropolitan population has been virtually stable since 1961, with the low rate of natural increase being entirely offset by net outmigration. Increasingly, families living in decaying substandard housing have been rehoused. Manchester has exported population to overspill estates at Middleton and Hyde, and Salford families have moved to Worsley. All of these are large schemes involving population transfers of at least 10,000, and all lie within the metropolitan area. Like many British cities, Manchester experimented in the 1960s with high-rise housing to accommodate families from the slum clearance zones. In the past, row houses have been the traditional housing form in low-income areas of the inner city, and the new high-rise schemes proved to be a social failure. Some were demolished within a decade of construction. The emphasis of city planning was shifted from total clearance and replacement of old housing to its conservation and improvement through housing action areas. Thus, old housing is given new life, and the community is kept together. Where new dwellings are built, they are the modern equivalent of the traditional row houses. The economy of Manchester. There has long been a contrast between the economies of the core city and the textile towns that form the northern and eastern margins of the urban cluster. Until the 1960s, the latter had narrowly based economies largely dependent on the textile trade, which still provided more than half the employment of women. The former, however, had an economy of greater diversity. Manufacturing was varied, including printing and the production of engineering and electrical products, chemicals, and clothing, and a broad range of service activities gave stability to the economy. Manchester's economy has been moving from an industrial to a post-industrial nature. Services have become the chief employers, with the thinking rather than the manual services undergoing expansion. Some services, such as transport and distribution, are declining, but the professions, finance and banking, administration, and general personal services are growing with explosive force. Most of these growth points require well-qualified workers. The declining demand for manual skills and the shift to mental skills have caused selective unemployment, which is clearly a persistent social problem. Trade and transportation. Apart from its massive volume of retail and wholesale trade, Manchester has a number of distinctions as a regional service center. It houses a branch of the Bank of England and the Northern Stock Exchange, the headquarters of the Cooperative Wholesale Society, and one of the major provincial crown courts. Its airport at Ringway, 10 miles south of the city, is the leading British terminal outside London in the volume of international traffic handled and in the diversity of both its European and its transatlantic services. Ringway is owned by the city and is the country's second air freight terminal. New industrial and commercial uses for the derelict terminal docks have been developed. Public transport in Greater Manchester is coordinated by a passenger transport executive, and it relies heavily on an integrated system of bus routes. The system faces private competition, however, especially from flexible minibus services. The city is also served by a dense network of commuter rail services. Education. Of all Manchester's pioneer cultural achievements, none has prospered more than the Victoria University of Manchester. After its foundation in 1851 at a site in Quay Street, the college received a charter in 1872 and began growth on its present site in 1873. By 1880, it had combined with member colleges in both Leeds and Liverpool to form a federal institution. Since becoming a separate body again in 1903, the university has grown to become one of the largest in Britain. The Faculty of Technology has become autonomous as an institute of science and technology, and with the establishment of the University of Salford in 1967 and the growth of a large polytechnic, there are now 4 institutions of higher learning in and near the city. The city provides the complete range of social and welfare services within the British system, but its special strength lies in health services and medical education. The Victoria University of Manchester has the largest medical school in Western Europe. It is linked to 3 large groups of teaching hospitals that provide specialist treatment. One of the most distinguished of these is the Christie Hospital, a major center for cancer research. Cultural life. The cultural life of Manchester suffered some losses during the 20th century. For example, its prestigious newspaper, The Guardian, has fled to London and dropped the city's name from its title. However, the Lowery, an architecturally innovative center for the visual and performing arts, opened in 2000 and signaled the city's cultural revival at the beginning of the 21st century. Music maintains its strengths. The Hal concerts reached their centenary in 1958, and the orchestra continues to maintain its international reputation. Among the galleries and museums, the Whitworth Art Gallery and the Manchester City Art Gallery are particularly well known. The latter contains a fine collection of paintings, sculpture, silver, and pottery, and is supplemented by several branch galleries. The Manchester Museum has special exhibits of Egyptian and Japanese objects, as well as natural history collections and an aquarium. The Museum of Science and Industry highlights Manchester's industrial heritage. There are 2 major football clubs, and at the grounds of the Old Trafford Cricket Club, test matches are played against overseas cricket teams visiting Great Britain. Manchester also has an active pop music scene which revolved around factory records in the 1980s and has given rise to several influential rock bands, including Joy Division, The Smiths, and Oasis.